Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're tuning in from.
All right, team.
Hello, another episode of the Present and Sober podcast for you. And this comes hot on the heels of one of our wonderful friends in the Facebook community, in our little Present and Sober podcast Facebook group, mentioned that they'd got a lot out of a particular episode, which was episode 63. And the title escapes me. Three things we wish we'd known about sobriety?
3 things we wish we'd known, yeah.
And in that episode, and the part that had really struck this individual was where we talked about the difference between expectation and intention. And we promised that we would do an episode about it. And what we usually do is we promise things, we put them into, if you imagine like a big, like, what they call Magi mix, we put stuff in there and then we put it in a cupboard and we forget about it for weeks or months on end.
We're quite good, actually. We're quite good. Normally, we've done, like, normally people have mentioned in the group and then we've recorded things within a few weeks. I think
we're doing really well, because here we are recording this one. But it's a really wonderful topic, and it has the propensity to change your relationship with yourself and with other people. So we wanted to do it justice. So our intention is
I was going to say, you're going to tell us
for this to be a 2-parter.
Are you going to tell us what the topic is? Have you done that?
Yes. Were you not listening to me?
Probably, clearly not.
And I'm also looking for a new partner for the Present and Sober podcast who actually listens to me.
Yeah. What's the word? Requests on a postcard too. Sorry, please continue.
So, no, I've lost my train of thought now, buddy.
Our intention is...
Oh, yeah. Our intention is to have a two-parter on the subject of intention versus expectation.
Yeah. Because what we thought would be really great was kind of, because words are just words, right? And different things mean, different things to different people. So we thought we'd kind of go on a bit of a journey through what intentions are, what expectations are. And then part 2 would be more of a kind of dive into the practical things that we can do to shift a few things up in our lives. Yeah, awesome. Should we do this then?
Let's do it.
Awesome.
I think we should start with your brewing discontent, because I like that.
Yeah, I can't remember who said it to me or where I read it, or, somewhere across my journey of all these things. Someone said to me, look, I think someone actually said to me, someone once said to me that expectations are brewing discontentments. And I was like struck by that. And I can remember my mind going off on I guess so. Because ultimately, if you expect something to happen, if you have an idea that something is going to happen, and like for all the times they do, then that's fine. But actually brewing in the background is the inevitable outcome that something you're expecting will happen doesn't. And then you're going to be disappointed by that. And I was like, And it was kind of logged. I logged it. And I've definitely said it a few times because it felt real to me. It felt true. And I thought it was just a nice place to start.
Yeah. And that, I just love the description of it as brewing discontent, because it kind of happens unnoticed. It's like, I just love that word brewing, because it describes it so beautifully. It's all like on the surface, everything's wonderful and rosy and lovely. And then there's this stuff going on at a much deeper level, and it can really have the capacity to either pull you under or blow things up. It just struck me when you were talking. Have you ever read Great Expectations?
Well, yeah. I mean, as an English literature teacher, I should, back in the day, I should have a very good working knowledge of it. It's not as good as it should be, but I have browsed it, yes.
I've browsed it. What a book that is. And that, like, for laying out that, like, when you read it, you can't help but feel the heaviness of that brewing, because it is so God, what's the word? It like that book, it's laced right through that book. So there you go. So there's a bit of light reading, light reading for anybody that hasn't delved into Dickens.
You could always watch the film, I suppose, if you're
no, don't go read the bloody book.
Don't do that.
Watch the film.
It's funny what you say though, because I think probably, and I mean we're going to explore this a bit more, but for a lot of us, expectations can cast a heavy weight or a shadow on our life. We don't even know where it's coming from.
Yeah.
And like we're gonna explore how some of these things are not even visible. Like some expectations are really clear. Like it's kind of, we know that we're expecting a certain thing to happen. Like, you're expecting someone to buy you a present on your birthday.
Oh, I've got.
And if they don't,
I've got a good one.
they're a knobhead.
Expecting your partner to come and visit you.
Oh, I did. You can't do that now. We haven't. Oh, well, I guess we haven't
released the official photograph.
Evidence. Yeah, there's going to be evidence now. There's more than one. There's like 5. And it was like a last minute thing. I was like, oh shit, we better actually take a picture of us together. Otherwise it's going to look like I just went and hung out with your kids for the day. It's like, you're not there. It was just me, Anyway, so you can look forward to that. It's official, people. It's happened. But yeah, that's a good example, right? You were basically being,
chewing myself up about it, creating all kinds of stories.
We nearly finished this. At least, this has nearly been over, like, I don't know, however many times in the last 6 months, just because of that expectation that you had of me.
And this is called, so Brooke Castillo calls this the manual, which I really like that. So it's for her, it's like this this rule book that you've written for other people, how other people should behave. And of course, they haven't necessarily read your rule book of how they should behave. So this is why we can encounter so many difficulties within our relationships.
Yeah, and that's the thing, like that the fact that they haven't read it, we've got a whole world created. Because I mean, we'll get onto expectations of ourselves, but ultimately, I think with others, it's probably it's maybe a bit more visible, even though a lot of this, we may not have thought about it before. So actually, just before we talk about this is kind of an invitation to anybody to just start having a look around and just start getting curious about where you may have the manual, where you may have these ideas of what other people should or shouldn't do. And like it, for me, there's kind of examples of this, but it might look like, getting back from work and expecting your partner to have done certain things in the house because you've had a really hard day at work and I don't know, like they've been doing something else or whatever. But without actually talking about these things, without actually saying what we would like to have happen or the kind of what's going on in our mind, how, we're not mind readers, are we, at the end of the day? And then we can walk in and be hit by these kind of like God.
But that's part of the manual as well, because have you not ever been in that situation where you expect somebody to have read your mind and know exactly what you want?
Well, this is
how you want it and when you want it.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things is like we literally live in alternate realities. We're in our own narratives about the world, and we're living in those tunnels, but we don't think we are. We expect the other person to just get it. And some people are intuitive. Some people do pick up on things, and sometimes our expectations do match, which is why these things are brewing, right? Is because at some point they won't. You can guarantee at some point someone is going to do something that you don't want them to do, or that's a bit of a wind up, or we're all human, so we are going to drop the ball every now and again as well. We're going to like do something that we perhaps have planned to do and then don't do it. And
I've got a good one.
Go on.
It's like when your brother comes around and he puts his feet up on the sofa.
Yeah, I expected him to realize that my brand new sofa was not for his fucking feet on the top of. That made no grammatical sense. That's how angry I still am, seething. No,
atop of the sofa.
I've spoken about this before, though, because I think it's a really interesting one to zoom out on. Like a fly on the wall would have seen like 2 human beings in a room with some objects in it. And one of them had their feet happened to have their feet up on this big blue thing that humans call a sofa, right? And they'd just be looking at this kind of scene. Meanwhile, in my mind, there was like the whole, he should fucking know not to do that on my new invisible. But I caught it.
Invisible.
I found it really funny because I watched it play out in my head, and then I watched it fizzle out, and then
and by the way, that is the top ninja tactic that people can practice at home of gaining that awareness in the moment. So either third party. So what would a third party, if there was another person here now observing this, independent third party, how would they view this? And I love what you said about the fly, because my teacher often says, like, well, what would the tree outside think then?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's quite hard to talk about this, but it's like a thought experiment. I find it really powerful personally, where if you think about what is actually going on in the world right now. So there's like, we're sat here recording a podcast, there's someone on a farm doing some stuff, there's people driving around. I mean, I'm not going to go through everybody. This is going to be a very long podcast, people, if I go through what everybody's up to, and I don't have a clue.
Some of it won't be what's the word?
won't be allowed.
Podcast worthy.
Yeah. Some of it might be too juicy for the podcast. But if you can imagine, right, there's all those people out there doing all that stuff. And the difference between what's actually happening that a tree would be observing and what's going on in their mind, because there are actually way more other alternate worlds going on right now than that. Like, there's someone driving home. We were talking about this yesterday. Someone's driving home from Morrison's. That's a supermarket in the UK for anyone who doesn't know.
Other supermarkets are available.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we're not sponsored, so fuck it. Go to Morrison's. I genuinely have no preference of where you go. There's someone driving home from Morrison's right now, but in their mind, they're in an entirely different place. They're back 37 years ago or however many years in the future, or they're in the world, or at Tesco's, or they're in a world thinking, why I expected Morrison's to have my favorite sausage rolls, those bastards. But the point we're making is that we lose objectivity because consciousness is a subjective experience, and it's our reality that we're living through. So many of these expectations we have are freaking invisible. They're stories that we don't even know are running. They're at deep subconscious levels, and then we innocently hit out at other people or blame other people for the experience that we're having, because it looks as if it's coming from them, but actually it's coming from deep within us, from our expectations, our belief systems, our narratives, our stories, however you want to language that. So knowing that is really helpful. And when you catch it and you can allow it to come up and just be like, I'm not going to do anything with this right now. I'm just going to sit with it. I'm going to sit with the feeling. You'll notice that it will subside in time. And then you will have different options available to you other than calling your brother on Obed or whatever it might be. Right.
Yeah. So your two access points, your two things to notice that will bring that opportunity to choose a different response. The first thing is the feeling of discontent. So you'll feel something in the body, and that's going to be different for all of us, but it's some form of agitation, some form of stickiness in the body. And then the second thing to look out for is should, because there will, in there somewhere, will be some form of a judgment and a great big old should. Oh, he shouldn't put his bloody shoes up on my... Was it his shoes or his feet? Sorry to dwell on this.
It was his sockless feet.
Oh, that's all right. They're just his little tootsie toes.
I'm not going to get into this right now. But yeah, you're right.
It'd have been worse if it was his shoes. Dirty shoes.
Oh God! Well, if it had been his shoes, he'd have been out.
He would not be your brother anymore.
That's it. Done. Yeah, and these kind, if you think about the kind of things that we often say, my mum should understand me by now, or I shouldn't have to explain this another time. Or
here's a good one: my children should behave.
Yeah, or like this class of 30 kids should be doing exactly what's on my lesson plan. Bastards. But it's so common, and like and they're not always vocalized, right? A lot of that stuff is kind of happening without words. It's kind of like at a deeper level than that. So yeah, get curious about it, right? Where may these things be in your life? Like, are some of these things, because the thing is, as Ellie's saying, you got to follow the breadcrumbs. It's going to come as a feeling. It's going to come as like, in TNM, it's like an energy snag we talk about, where you get like hit by a something that catches you, and then you're like, why has that just happened? Like, I just walked into a room and my boss, who's been really polite, just, I don't know, did something, and now I'm really pissed off. Like, what's that about?
Mm.
You know, maybe he made someone a coffee, didn't make you a coffee. I don't know. Could be anything, right?
Mm.
Could be anything.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, and it's the so the part, there is a part that's invisible, but the part that is visible, not necessarily by the eyes, but that comes into awareness is this shift in energy. So that is really the thing to place your attention on, because it what it does is opens up choice. We may still react, and as we delve more into this kind of inner work, and this is something for, as a side for everybody to watch out for, is the judgment of self for being a human being. So you can be a very enlightened being and still react at times, and still be triggered at times.
Yeah, of course.
But the important thing is how available lucidity is to you. You know, it's the old famous Ram Dass quote around, if you feel that you're enlightened, then go and spend Thanksgiving with your family.
Oh, that's my favorite. Go spend a week with your parents. So true. And here's the thing that's interesting about you. So people may have heard me and other people say, you know, and you, Ellie, the things around, you know, everyone's doing what makes sense to them with their current level of understanding. Now, the thing is, if you're in the midst of, if something's essentially come into your world and led to a mood, right? So it could be anger or whatever it might be. Here's the interesting thing. What makes sense to you, the action that makes sense to you when you're in the midst of a fiery, angry rage, will be very different to the action that makes sense to you if you're feeling lucid and chill. Now, here's the thing then, right? If when the feeling comes up, if you can essentially be like, oh, this is okay, I'm going to accept this. Interesting. Why is this here? Where is it in my body? I'm going to breathe into this. And if you're with that feeling and it starts to transmute and settle and starts to be something else, very soon after that, what makes sense to you will be different. So it's not like like what makes sense to you according to your current level of understanding. It's not static. Like if I try and have a really deep, meaningful conversation with Robin, my partner, when I'm fucking pissed off, what makes sense to me is going to be very different to the next morning when I'm like, God, I've got some more perspective and the snow globe has settled. So I'm not talking about a static intellectual understanding. So this is really practical. So yeah, practicing feeling your feelings and knowing it's safe to do that, and breathing and being with them and sitting with them, and then just noticing as they start to change and shift is really powerful. And it can be probably the most useful thing on this journey to start being more responsive, less reactive, and shining a light on these invisible expectations is a part of that.
Yeah, it's a route. It's a route to compassion. Yeah, compassion for self, for others, for all beings. And I loved that reminder of that level of understanding not being static, because I think people can fall into the trap of thinking that, you know, it is like this. It's like this intellectual level of understanding, and that's not what we're talking about. And it's going to shift and move around. And the more that we can become aware of that and understand it and appreciate it for what it is in ourselves and in others, then we're going to have a much easier time with our relationships.
Yeah, just as a little side to this, knowing how that works, like, you know, we have like, because here's the thing, normally if you're going to try and say, I'll give you an example of what a lot of people might try and do if they're going to try and go through something challenging between a relationship or something like that. They're like, here's all the things that I'm annoyed about. And then the other person's like, here's all the things that I'm annoyed about. And then they just like dig their trenches, right? And we've all been there. We've all done that. Now that's kind of like a low mood way of trying to figure things out. You basically dive into all the things that are pissing you off about each other. Well, the thing is, that's not the only way. Like, it's very, very possible to have a completely fresh start where you basically just say, like, let's just throw out the model that we've got in our head. And when we're in a high mood, like that whole thing of like never go to bed out on an argument, But then that means you're up all night fucking trying to figure stuff out.
By the way, I'm glad that you brought that up, because I could not fucking disagree with that more. It's
my experience.
Utter shit. And that puts expectations on people independently to then, like, there are times where things are better left alone and not poked and not prodded and not agitated, whether it's something that you're dealing with independently on your own internally, or whether it's, and usually, especially when it involves somebody else, like, we need other people's consent. Like, just to, oh, well, hang on, somebody once told me that I should never go to bed on an argument, so I'm gonna brutally follow this through. Like, no, please don't do that.
Well, it's really funny. I was in London the other week watching Michael Neal and Dick and Bettinger, two of my favorite people in the world, have a discussion. And at one point, Michael Neal was saying that he'd realised how bullshit that statement was as well. And he'd realised it because he'd got back from like some trip. He's flying around all over the place all the time because he's off doing talks and whatever. And he'd got home to America and he was absolutely shattered. And he said he walked into the house and his wife was pissed off. And he was like, oh, God, what have I done? And he sat down on the sofa and she started trying to talk to him. And he was like, I really don't think I can. And he started to fall asleep and she was talking to him. And at the moment he falls asleep, he remembers thinking to himself, oh, God, have I just ruined my marriage? Right. Because he's thinking, you never do this. And then he wakes up the next morning and, his wife gets out of bed and she's not really saying anything. She's just being completely normal. And he's like, oh, God, she's really pissed off. Like, this must be big because this is big. Anyway, so they go about that day. And then the next day, she's still like not. Yeah. And he's like, oh, this must be really massive. And it's brewing inside of him. He's starting to really freak out about this. Anyway, he gets to the third day and he can't take it anymore. And he's just like, will you please just tell me what you were so pissed off about when I got home? And she looked at him and she was like, was I pissed off? And he was like, oh. And then another time he was talking about how she wanted to talk something through with him in the evening. And he was saying, like, I really just want to go to bed. And she was like, no, we need to talk about this now. And he was like, no, I really just want to go to bed. Why can't I just go to bed? And she was like, because I'm not going to be pissed off with you in the morning. But it's true. Like, it speaks to this kind of like the settling of the snow globe that we talk about a lot. We're on a bit of a tangent right now, but I think it's an important one. Just that self-resolving nature of like taking your hands off the steering wheel, putting the snow globe down, allowing it to settle.
Yeah.
That takes a bit of courage, but just it may just not be something that you've practiced a lot, but if you start leaning in that direction and practicing it, you'll be amazed how self-resolving it can be, how much more joy is in your life and in your relationships, because you're not having these discussions when you're not your best self is not the best time to have them.
No, it's not. And the compounded nature of expectations, rule book, like creating these rules, maintaining these rules in your own head with your own meaning and stories and justifications, and then all of the energy that you need to exert to try to control situations and other people. Like, wow, like, that's exhausting. That's really, really exhausting. And sometimes effective with kids, maybe trying to control kids to behave, but at what cost? And not just to yourself, but to others, to your relationship. And so contrast that with this, admittedly takes some courage, this radical idea of taking your hands off the steering wheel and letting things be.
Yeah.
And that is really energy saving and energy giving. And the more that we can allow ourselves that opportunity, the more that we can see the results in our lives, and we gather the evidence, and then you're going to do more of it, as per Mr. Michael Neal and as per, my view of, I always remember hearing that and thinking, like, it's fucking nonsense, isn't it? How we can sometimes adopt these beliefs that aren't ours and feel like we have to see these things through.
Yeah.
even though we have this deep knowing that it's detrimental.
Yeah, and the problem with all these things is we're then not in our wisdom. And when you're trusting in an adage or something that's like been around, or a belief that's held at the society level of society, or whatever it might be, or an old wives' tale, whatever it might be, whatever you've innocently put your trust in because it's just what you've always done, or because it's what your dad said, or whatever, right? Then you're not in your wisdom, and wisdom is way more powerful. Wisdom is not even in the intellect as I see it. Wisdom comes from just the trust that when things settle, like how many times are we like racked with like, oh, I just have to figure this out. I need to use my intellect to find out the right answer to this. And in the end, we're like, do you know what? I can't do this to myself anymore. Screw it. I'm just going to put it to the side. And then a couple of days later, or whenever is the right time, you go, oh, that's what I need to do. Or, oh, that's what I'm going to do. Now, that's not coming from you. That's coming from somewhere much deeper. And it's true here as well. You know, if you realize that you've got an expectation, you don't have to do anything. You're just like, oh, it's just the seeing of it is powerful. And just the trust that, you know, things will self-resolve and things will look different. Well, how many of us have got wise friends who are just like, you know, you say, you're not going to do anything about it. And they're like, yeah, nah. And you're like, what? And they're like, yeah, it'll look different next week. And some people are just, for whatever reason, they're just a bit more wired like that. And good for them, because that's a really wonderful thing, a gift to have.
Do you think they're the same kind of people that ride the petrol tank right down to fumes?
Sometimes. I mean, look, you're looking at someone who can do that.
Because I can't. It gets to the orange or the red line, you know, where you've got a quarter left. Start to panic.
Well, the other day, it's so funny. The other day I said to my dad, I went to the petrol station because the light went on. He went, oh, don't do that. Don't do that. You never know what could happen to you. You don't know what could happen to the car if you do that. But yeah, but I've got like 20 miles left in the tank though, haven't I? And he's like, the petrol and like the station's like, you know, 10. I was literally talking about a car tank here of like the petrol tank light coming on. Yeah, I don't know. I think if you're trusting in, trusting in Mother Earth, and just trusting that things are going to come when there is a really wonderful way to live life. And in my experience, the more I've done that, the more it feels like serendipity is everywhere, and it feels like it comes at the right time. And sometimes it gets a bit hairy, but I now trust in that's okay, and that sometimes it's meant to. Well, you know, in my life, even some things we've been talking about recently, I've been a little bit like, oh God, but like it's trust. It's trust.
Yeah, it is. And she's never let us down. Even the time where we had there was a recent petrol crisis over this side of the pond. And we literally, I was driving to the caravan. I literally got to the caravan and I had, I don't know, maybe 8 miles in the tank. Like that was, and I managed to get there. But then the next day, I had to send out the poor dear husband. He had to go out and risk life and limb in downtown Suffolk trying to find petrol. And he literally had 8 miles. So if he went in the wrong direction, if his wisdom wasn't in action, it guided in the wrong way, we were going to be all kinds of stuck.
And here's the thing, though. It's not that people don't get stuck. It's not that people don't run out of petrol. It's not that people aren't living in some horrific situations in the world right now. But the thing that we all have going for us, wherever we are, is that there's this thing nudging us one way or the other. And like tuning into that, the inner GPS is really powerful. And God, we've been on such a detour here, haven't we?
Yeah, and I'm about to go on another one as well. Well, I'm just going to add on to the end of that when we're talking about this guidance, this wisdom, it's not a passive thing. So we're not suggesting that you totally disengage from the world, because we're embodied, right?
You've got to fill the tank. You've got to go to the petrol station. It doesn't just keep filling itself up.
Please don't literally take your hands off the wheel. It's not like the car.
Unless you've got a self-driving Tesla. If you've got a self-driving Tesla, maybe the Tesla's inner wisdom, although it would still freak me out. I think I'd still have a moment.
Yeah, I'm not sure I would like that either. So yes, but I'll tell you what, there's another subject that we'll come back to another time.
For sure. And these are things, you know, for anyone, these are things that in all of our programs, we really dive deep on these things. Yeah. We really crack them open, because they're practical. These are things that some people can hear and think, oh, that's a nice idea. And what we're saying is, no, this is like a ruthlessly practical truth that's going to support you through life. And it's looking in a different direction. It's a different calibration. It's always been there. But when you've been calibrating to the intellect, you will miss it. You won't see it. You won't realize that actually we are innately healthy. We have a recalibration system that brings us back to center, but you have to clear the way. Otherwise it gets blocked. And what we've all got innocently often is a lot of fucking blocks that we don't even know are there. And talking about, like, that's a really nice lead into just to riff a little bit on expectations of self. I was talking about an experience I had a few years back when I first did like a coach training. So I'd already been teaching for a long time, and then I went into coaching, and I had an expectation of myself that I was going to bat it out the park. I was going to get a distinction, and this was going to happen, and that was going to happen. So I did everything. I dotted every I, crossed every T. I busted a gut. I did so much extra to get myself to this thing, and I just expected to get the distinction or whatever it was they talked about it. Now the day came around for this to get the results or whatever, and I'd missed out on a distinction by, and this is no joke, it was something like 0.006%, because they'd done some kind of weird calculation of all the different things you do, and it was some wild number that was way less than like 1%, right? It was a fraction. And it meant the difference between whatever they do, distinction or merit, right? And then I was hit, because I had the expectation, that I got a bunch of feelings. Now, obviously, I processed those feelings, and I got to a point where I realized it really doesn't matter. And it doesn't, like, ultimately pieces of paper with stamps on don't mean a whole lot in this world once you get into the real world. It's about...
I think we might have a few...
Well,
a few letters maybe coming in for some PhDs.
Well, yeah, I know. Okay, I get you. So in terms of like getting you to be able to do a certain thing, for sure. Like, I'm not saying they don't open doors and that kind of stuff. You know what I mean? But ultimately, when you're sat in front of a coaching client, it's about relationship, connection, love, all that stuff. That's what moves the needle, right? And so it was really interesting. So the next time I did anything, I made a decision that I'm not going to have an expectation. I'm going to have an intention. And the intention is that I'm going to do everything that makes sense to me that's going to make me a great coach. I'm going to follow through on that joyfully. And things that are like clearly hoop jumping, I'm going to do them because I have to do them, but I'm not going to like be brutal with myself about da-da-da-da-da. Anyway, long story short, I can't actually quite remember, but I think I got the same grade. I had a much more joyful experience. I learned more about myself and about other people, and I became a better coach because I had an intention over an expectation. And it's wild. I was so fucking stressed out. Like, because I had that expectation of myself that I was going to do that thing because it was tied to my sense of self-worth, and I was going to prove myself because I'd always messed up and been drinking and drug taking for everything else I'd done in my life. This was the one. And it wasn't helpful. It wasn't helpful for me. Look, don't get me wrong. The energy was powerful. Like, I got a lot done, but I was frazzled, and I was not in a good place for some of that.
Yeah, we can really do ourselves a disservice in all sorts of ways with the level of expectations we put upon ourselves, and usually highly unrealistic expectations. And it stifles creative energy.
Yeah.
It stifles our connection with ourselves. It doesn't allow us to really like blossom and bloom and really live into our full expression. Funnily enough, this morning I was you're gonna laugh at this one. I was sat trying to meditate. The reason I was trying to meditate was Noah, the littlest one, was sat on my bed with Bluey on. And if anybody's come across Bluey, it's an awesome show. It's of all of the cartoons, kids shows, it's awesome. She's got Bluey on really loud, and I kept tuning into Bluey because it's funny, right? So I'm kind of in this weird. It's one of the weirdest meditations I've ever sat for, with Bluey right there with me. So I come out of my meditation practice, and I was doing some journaling, and I was about to go into affirmative prayer and literally put my head on the floor, and she like something had happened with Bluey. Like it's on Disney, and when the wheel's going but it's not playing, so she starts going mental, and I'm right in the middle of repeating mantra or whatever I'm doing. And I'm like, oh God, because I was so trying to focus on my practice, and yet I'm being pulled into this mothering situation. And the reason for bringing this up is we can have expectations of ourselves, like, I'm going to be not just like the best mother that I can be, but I'm going to be, I'm always going to be calm. Like, I'm never going to get impatient or shout or get cross with my kids. And it's totally and utterly unrealistic, because these sorts of scenarios always come about. And when I felt and part of this is my manual with her of like, she should just wait, right? She should just be patient. Well, why should she? Because she's 4 and all she can see is the spinny roundy thing, and she actually wants to watch Bluey. So in her world, it's quite reasonable that she's like, Mummy, can you stop doing that? Whatever that is. So for the split second that I was caught up in it, what does it feel like? It feels like anger starting to come up, like, like anger and frustration and resentment. And I caught it and I was like, oh, like, what the so allowed it to settle. And I was just breathing. She's still getting a bit antsy. I'm breathing deep and came completely out of expectation and dropped right into intention. And what is my intention? My intention is to find the love here. Love is always present. Where is it? And so I got up from my head on the floor situation, and I brought her to my knee and just sat and cuddled her. And it was just like lovely and wonderful, and just like one of those moments of connection, being entirely present, me and her. It was wonderful. And then I put her back on the bed, sort out Bluey, and go back to what I'm doing. But I know that there's a part of me in the past that, a bit like you can't go to sleep on an argument. Like, your meditation or your prayer or whatever the practice is has to be seen through a certain way. And children shouldn't interrupt me, and they should behave, and I shouldn't get angry about it. So, we're day in, day out, we're all going to be encountered with these situations and circumstances and interactions. But all it takes is to recognize what's going on, usually led by that feeling, and then giving yourself some grace in the moment for another outcome, another possibility.
Yeah, I love it. And so just before, I don't know, maybe this would be a really nice time to kind of pause, because then I feel like we can flow into talking a bit more about intentions and the practical elements of what that looks like in part 2. But before we do that, just to wrap it up, something that really struck me when you were talking there was it was just a realization I'd had just now in and around how I used to consider like waking up and spiritual awakening and things like that. Because I mean, I'd realized that I had an ideal. I realized I'd had an ideal, which was that, you walk around Zen all the time. You're never going to get this. You're never going to react and be angry. I think it's common. It's very common. But actually, I hadn't really seen it through the lens of an expectation as well. I was expecting I can see the pattern. But I'd been like, dude, you've been meditating for hours a day for this many years, and I had an expectation that I should be a certain person by that. I should be more Zen'd out. Exactly. I should be this. Yeah. And that was ironically doing the opposite. It was kind of having the experience the way you are, where you're in a really sacred moment where, who knows, perhaps the universe is sending us a message, Noah's there bouncing, like there's something to learn, there's something to see, which amazing that you had that experience. But yeah, ideals, they're like the horizon. Like this, one of my good mentors and friends always says this, they're like the horizon. You think you nearly get in there, and then that bastard disappears again. And often it's like, so an expectation of an ideal is like a double whammy of fuck up, because you're basically expecting something to happen that isn't even possible because it's idealistic. It's not real. So yeah,
you're setting yourself up for not good enoughness. And usually we're gathering, we're communing together. around the whole notion that, you know, we've all started out with some level of disconnection from source and not good enoughness. And that's why we're all here together and why we're all working on the kinds of things that we're working on. So to be working on that and then at the same time setting yourself up with, like you say, the double whammy of expectations and ideals, it's just serving to not set us back. It's just another part of the waking up process. It's another part of the learning. Like we've each got a really unique path to walk along, and the more that we can welcome that and all of its idiosyncrasies, then it's going to be a much smoother ride. You're still going to feel everything, but it's going to be a smoother, more easeful ride.
Yeah, you're going to and like it's innocent, right? So be careful not to innocently have an expectation that you're going to drop all your expectations. You know, this is like a fractal thing that keeps coming back round. Like it's like a ninja thing that's going to keep going, right? It's not just like one and done. You know, it's worth listening to things like this again and stuff like that. So, well, hey, look, it seems to me, I don't know if it does to you, pal, but let's we'll hit pause. Also means I can have a wee. We can hit pause and then we can come back for part 2 and we can riff a bit about effectively what we mean by an intention, kind of a bit more definition around that, and then some practical elements of how we can invite those things into our life where they're important and things like that. Sound good to you?
Great plan.
Awesome.